Welcome back. Farmers Outkick Studios. You can call 1-888-FARMERS to switch, and you could save a bundle on your auto insurance. Fuhrman, I'm not going to ask you to get into it, but I was just talking to start the third hour of the program. I was thinking to myself, man, NCAA tournament, no way it's not going to be my primary story with the NCAA tournament returning for the first time in basically 2 years. And this Deshaun Watson story has just exploded and completely began to overshadow the fact that the NCAA tournament's coming back.
Well, there's no doubt about it. I don't think any of us wanted the NFL to grab headlines for those particular reasons. It just begs the question. Clearly, the Houston Texans didn't know some of these allegations would rise to the surface. Otherwise, they probably would have traded Deshaun Watson earlier this offseason already. You hope that all parties involved, ultimately the truth comes to bear, and the NFL is going to have to do an awful lot when it comes to league conduct policy if all of these allegations end up holding to be true.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mess in general. All right, so let's go into the NCAA tournament. I was talking on the show earlier, and I'm curious if you would agree with this. Just about every sport found a way to play, even in the COVID era, and crown a champion, with the exception of the NCAA tournament for college basketball. Is it fair to say that the biggest loser in the world of sports because of COVID and the timing in which it occurred last year in March was the NCAA tournament? Because I feel like we got the Masters in November. We got the NBA and the NHL, even though it was non-traditional season. Same thing with Major League Baseball. NFL didn't even skip a beat. They had a full season. Fair to say that college basketball was the biggest loser based on the calendar and the time in which it occurred in all of sports?
Hands down, when you talk about the pandemic officially being announced or recognized here on American soil, it happened right in the early portion of March, and the NCAA tournament synonymous with March. There wasn't enough of a window for the tournament to figure out, hey, look, we're going to hit pause, and we're going to try and resume things during the summer. Every other league was able to navigate around it with a work stoppage, as you mentioned, the NBA and the NHL. The NFL was so far removed that they put their protocols in place, and other than the cancellations here and there, ultimately we got the Super Bowl to play out, much like I think a lot of us anticipated. So for all those college basketball fans that are out there and those that just clamor for 3 weeks a year for the energy and excitement, we're finally going to have our appetite quenched when we look at the tournament. Over 700 days or thereabouts since we've seen the field of 68 announced, and a 3-week window that is arguably the best betting time of the year.
All right, would you take Gonzaga? We had this debate on Fox Bet Live, the show that we co-hosted yesterday, but Gonzaga and Illinois, those are the two teams that you've bet on the show. Would you take those two teams, or would you take the field at this point as we get ready for the tournament to tip off here in a few hours?
If I got to pick those two teams, I would take them over the field. I think when you look at the bracket that Gonzaga is going to have to navigate through, it's the easiest of all four number one seeds. There's a reason that they open right around $1.75 favorite to win their region on FanDuel. That number was bet out to $2.50. I've even seen some prices higher than that out here in the desert. And as fate may have it, Gonzaga has already beaten the 2, the 3, and the 4 seed in their region. Now, you do worry about the Bulldogs and how rigorous or lack thereof the West Coast Conference schedule was. But I think unless something unusual and extraordinary happens, they'll get into the Final Four. Illinois, though, has their work cut out for them. The committee did them no favors, but this is a team that's coming in playing the best basketball, in my opinion, of any team in the country. One loss since the middle of January, that coming against Michigan State. And I think when you look at the Illini, they have the guard play, they have the interior scoring, and Brad Underwood has a roster that's a little bit deeper now with the emergence of Andre Corbello than what we thought the Illini were going to be. So I would take those two teams against the field, but it depends all again on what price you're offering me. Right around a pick 'em, I think, would be my cutoff.
How good is the Big Ten in your mind? We gauge whether a conference is strong or not based on these end-of-the-season contests, right? In college basketball, certainly in college football, it's the bowl games. If I gave you the Big Ten or the field, would you take it?
I think I'd have to, but there is definitely some skepticism because when you look around the landscape of college basketball, we didn't have nearly the same rigorous non-conference slates that we've grown accustomed to in the past. And if you go through some of the powers in the Big Ten, Michigan, they played nobody outside the league. You look at Illinois, they had to outlast a team like Ohio 77-74. They came up on the wrong end of a bragging rights game against Missouri in the non-conference, and suddenly that resume-building win that the Illini had back in December over Duke doesn't look so good, but the blowout loss to Baylor you can understand. So when we start to buy into these conference narratives, when these teams haven't played anybody outside their leagues, you definitely have to go in with a little bit of guarded skepticism. The one league that we have seen step out of their comfort zone has been the Big 12 when they played the SEC, and you saw a lot of the big boys in the Big 12 actually hold serve against their compatriots in the SEC. Oklahoma over Alabama, arguably the most noticeable of all of them. So I think for me, the Big 10 deserves that mantle as the conference to beat, but I wouldn't rule out the Big 12 being the best league in the country top to bottom.
Okay, so let's break down the NCAA tournament in general. Everybody's filling out their brackets. I'm going to tell you my bracket, my Final Four, in the final segment of this show. We've got the Fox Sports Radio Challenge. A lot of people getting their bets in. Make sure you do. FanDuel.com/Clay. Get hooked up there. Are there any lessons that you bring to bear every single year in the tournament? And I'll start with this one. Historically, 12 seeds, 24 and 16 straight up against 5 seeds over the past several tournaments. Are there any things that you basically guarantee yourself that you're going to do every year, or anything that you found there's an advantage in from a year-to-year basis?
Honestly, the best way to try and go through and fill out some of these brackets oftentimes is to remove the seed numbers entirely. And I know that sounds like a ridiculous assessment for those folks that don't really follow college basketball throughout the course of the year, but don't feel like you have to take these double-digit seeds to advance. Sometimes for those folks who just want to compete, you're better off advancing the favorites, hoping seeds hold. But we know that the stories that are out there that get spun is, there's going to be a handful of double-digit seeds that get into the Sweet 16. There'll be a team outside the top 4 lines that make the Final Four. But unless you have that crystal ball, you're going to put yourself in a pretty good spot picking a lot of 1s and 2s to make deep runs there. And depending on your pool format, that's going to pay more dividends than trying to take a long shot and catch lightning in a bottle with a VCU or George Mason. Now, that changes a little bit if you're in a pool that rewards bonus points for seeds. Then you want to take a few more risks that are out there and kind of use odds makers' numbers as a litmus test to try and identify where some of those upsets might come. But you mentioned the 5 versus 12, and we've heard this all week long, but there aren't really short numbers on any of those 5-12 matchups. All the 5s are at least 5-point favorites or greater. We've seen in the years past the committee has pitted some of those matchups where they're ultimately around to pick them. So I never really try and fall in love with seed numbers when it comes to filling out my bracket, but I know for a lot of folks, they want to be able to pound their chest when they ultimately identify that 13 over a 4 or 14 over a 3.
I will say this, too. If you're trying to win a bracket challenge, as I know many people are, either at work or your family or friends, a lot of people are going to be picking Gonzaga, right? I mean, they are a prohibitive favorite. So a lot of times the way you end up winning a bracket challenge is by taking a team that's a little bit outside of maybe that popular scope. And I mean somebody down around a 4 or 5 line where, I don't mean the 4 or 5 in the bracket, I mean the 4th or 5th or 6th most popular team to win a tournament, because you get a lot more value there than you would picking the Zags, for instance, to win.
Oh, for sure. And I think a lot of it is going to depend on game theory as well. If you're in a smaller pool with friends and family, you can pick the favorites. You can lean on the Illinois and Gonzagas to go out there and do the dirty work, hoping that they win the national championship. But if you find yourself in a work pool that's based in Seattle or Chicago, where you know the majority of people are going to pick some of the local teams, you have to go outside your comfort zone. And I tell people all the time, do you want to just finish in 30th in a pool outside the money, or do you want to have that boom or bust opportunity? And for me, unless I'm finishing in the top 3, which a lot of these pools will pay, or dead last, it doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of a difference. So when you want to go outside, I think regional bias plays a role. The bigger the pool, the more creative you have to get figuring out a national champion, because I've seen pools in the past where if you can find that 4 seed, nothing else matters other than maybe picking the national champion. And should it be a Florida State or something along those lines, you cannot pay attention to anything else that's out there. You find yourself rooting for just one team, and sometimes it can simplify the experience on the whole.
Okay, let's go into the bracket itself. Everybody knows 1s and 2 seeds. Is there someone that you see based on the way the bracket is setting up and you think to yourself, that could be a dark horse team to make a Final Four run? Do any teams jump out to you in that respect?
Well, for me, when I look at dark horse, it comes with probably a little bit more of a criteria than a lot of folks out there. So I'll focus on teams seeded 6 or lower that I think have some of that boom or bust. And when I look at the SEC, I think this is a league that's a little bit vulnerable, in my opinion. Arkansas and Alabama have been great storylines, but when you look at Alabama, nobody on the roster over 6'8" that plays regular minutes. It's a team that leads the country in made threes and three-pointers attempted. But as we've seen in the past, if you go cold for one game, it's not a best-of-7 series. So I look at the second-round matchup potentially against a team like UConn that can extend the perimeter, that has some big bodies inside. And when I see UConn at 12-1 to win the region right now at FanDuel, that's a team that I'd be willing to take a flyer on, because I think when you look at the East from top to bottom, I'm skeptical of the favorite in Michigan. We talked earlier this week on Fox Bet Live, and you brought up some excellent points talking about LSU, who on their best days is as talented as any team in this
That's
field.
Right.
The problem for the LSU Tigers, shot selection can be poor, and this is a team that may make some YMCA teams look like defensive juggernauts if they're not committed at that end of the court. So that's a region where I think you can go a little bit off the beaten path. I'm not going to get cute and try and knock Gonzaga off with anybody in their bracket. Illinois, I'd love to see them take on the winner of Tennessee, Oklahoma State if seeds hold there. I think Houston, a very favorable path. And when I look in the South, Baylor is a team that I don't think enough people are talking about, because once they came back from the pause, they've been a little bit under the radar. But for me, I know they've taken money against them, but I think Texas Tech, if they get through a landmine potential against Utah State, I love Chris Beard as their head coach, and I think this is a team that can erase some of those demons for a regular season that got away from them, given the rigorous Big 12 conference schedule they faced.
How much time do you spend looking at head coaches, and in particular, when you get past that opening game, which, let's be honest, people can spend a week or more preparing for, but those usually it's a Friday, Sunday, Thursday, Saturday. This year, I guess it'll be a Friday, Sunday, and Saturday, Monday games. 48 hours basically to get your team ready, come back down the high of having won a game to try to figure out who's going to advance to the Sweet 16. How much do you look at coaches?
Massive. You mentioned the turnaround and the fact that you have 36 hours to prepare for your next opponent after winning your round of 64 game or a game in the Sweet 16. This is where I'll attribute a big-time numerical value to some of the better head coaches that are out there, because they can make up some of your shortcomings as it pertains to athletic differences or styles or things along those lines. So more so than during the regular season or even conference tournaments with quick 24-hour turnaround, I think coaching plays a huge role. So if you're looking for that so-called Cinderella or a double-digit seed, you're going to want to find coaches that have been there and done that before. And when I look at one particular region in the West, I think you can make the case that Dane Altman might be the best head coach in charge of the 7th seed in Oregon. And if they were to match up against Kansas in the round of 16 or something along those lines, I'd have no problem backing the Ducks despite having a talent deficiency, knowing that Dana was going to have his team ready to go. But Oregon will have their hands full in their opener against VCU, where they've been bet down from a 6-point favorite down to 5.
How much do you like to bet in-game and/or adjust in the course of the game? So there are a lot of people out there who are listening to us right now. Let's presume that they're in a jurisdiction where they can wager, which increasingly more and more people can. Do you like to live wager during games, or do you tend to get your picks in and then just wait and see what happens?
I think live wagering is one of the best opportunities that's out there, but I do worry a little bit for folks that are new to sports betting, because it can be that very addictive, that quick high where emotion overrides some of your sentiment and thought process. So for me, when it comes to live betting, if I've missed a number for a game, for example, last night between Drake and Wichita State, if I thought Wichita State was going to be my bet going in, if I thought Drake was going to be my bet going in and I missed them +2 on the open, then you can wait and try and bet them live when they were down early in the first half to try and take advantage. But if you don't go in and you just want to try and fire haphazardly, it becomes a little bit dangerous, to say the least. So for a lot of folks out there, sometimes they say you may be better off waiting until halftime. So at least you get 20 minutes in the books. You can assess some of those runs and try and figure out if those shooting anomalies, whether they be good or bad, are going to correct themselves and regress to the mean in the second half.
Texas Southern gets a win to start the NCAA tournament over Mount St. Mary's. Crazy that was the first NCAA tournament game we had since Virginia beat Texas Tech. That feels like ages ago, doesn't it? I mean, it's kind of wild.
Oh, it feels like an eternity has gone by, and you think about how the world has changed in that time period, not just during the pandemic, but everything else that's gone on in sports. And I think one of the other storylines that's even more fascinating, when you think about a team like Loyola and their leading scorer, Cameron Trotwig in the middle, who's now a senior who's broken all sorts of records with his points, rebounds, and assists. This is a guy that was a freshman that didn't get regular minutes on the Loyola team that went to the Final Four, what feels like an eternity ago. And that just goes to show the lifespan of the collegiate athlete and how much can change, because we're not just in an era of true one-and-dones. And I think you're going to see a lot of that on display, not only today, but through the opening weekend. That veteran leadership and coaching will play an even bigger role with teams in the bubble in a small, contained environment, trying to keep that razor focus, much like we've seen in professional sports and college football to a lesser extent, where the cream really rose to the top.
What's it going to feel like in Vegas this year? Last year, obviously, the NCAA tournament gets shut off. People aren't able to experience it. In fact, everybody's got their own story about sports shutting down, but the expectation was that we were going to be doing the show from Vegas. And then all of a sudden, everything comes unraveled. The NCAA tournament doesn't happen. It's been 2 years since we were out in Vegas doing the tournament. What do you anticipate Vegas feeling like this year for the NCAA tournament?
Well, if yesterday was any indication with the first four, I think people are going to come out in full force. Now, of course, we're still not open in full capacity, but there are plenty of ways through various bars, some of the sports books, and everything else to be able to take advantage of the amenities that are here. People have an appetite to bet. They have a desire to be in the mix. And even with sports betting spreading across the country, it's still a much different experience to be here in Las Vegas, the mecca of sports betting, compared to some of the restaurants and bars that are out there. So I may actually take an opportunity to go down, whether it's later today or maybe even Sunday, to try and soak up the scene, because as ridiculous and nostalgic as this sounds, something that we took for granted and we always thought was going to be there, I guess we have to start appreciating it every year that we get it in its full glory.
Yeah, there's no doubt at all about that. What do you anticipate the handle will look like? I always get asked this question, like, how big is it in general, the amount of money being gambled on the NCAA tournament compared to, say, a Super Bowl?
Well, when you look at the entire composite of the NCAA tournament, knowing you have 4 days of the opening weekend that'll represent a lion's share of the betting handle, and then you add in the other rounds, the NCAA tournament ultimately surpasses the Super Bowl just because you have a volume of games. And whether you're a $10 bettor or a $20 bettor, there's a good chance you're rolling over that money multiple times should you be out here in the desert, unlike the Super Bowl where you may make a bet before the game or a handful of props, but you're not going to bet it 30 to 40 times during the course of regulation through various live wagers. So if you believe what some of the operators have said, they think this will be a record-breaking number out here. And I think a lot of credit goes to some of these sports books that are getting more creative. They're developing expansive menus. And I think a big reason for that is that they're seeing a lot of pressure outside of our state borders with books like FanDuel and the Flutter Group that are really trying to push different, unique ways for people to put their money to work for them.
Last question for you. The NFL announced a new television rights deal, runs all the way through 2033, and a part of those television rights deals is an expanded embrace, it appears, between the NFL and sports gambling. What do you anticipate the NFL games looking like in the years ahead as sports gambling becomes more and more pronounced across the country?
I think we're going to have a lot more second screen viewing and the opportunity that you can watch these games inside your favorite sports betting apps with menus that are there, kind of triggering and providing opportunities for you to get involved at a moment's notice. One of the biggest issues right now that sports books are going to run into, and the NFL on some level, is the latency experience.
Amen. Especially with Amazon on Prime, right, for Thursday Night Football?
There's no doubt about it. For anybody that watched the Cardinals and 49ers game on Amazon, I have live scoreboard access. My scoreboard was updating 60 to 90 seconds in advance of plays actually transpiring on the field. Those folks that watch games on DirecTV that have tried to live bet know some of the challenges there. So while the NFL may not think this is a big deal, it is a very real concern if you want to try and find ways to further engage your audience. And Roger Goodell made note of it. I believe it was Albert Breer that put out the tweet and it said gambling is going to be at the forefront for how NFL is going to be viewed going forward. So Amazon, with all of their technological wizardry and everything else, has to figure out how they can bridge that gap, keep the fan involved, and figure out how to ultimately take care of the best viewing experience. Because for anybody out there, and I don't have kids of my own, and I don't watch a ton of movies streaming-wise, everyone knows that there's nothing more frustrating than you're watching your favorite show or movie to buffer, let alone a live sporting event.
So, Fuhrman, I was just talking about we're doing a live event down in Nashville at Old Smoky. So for anybody out there listening live or on the podcast, we'll be there early tip-off all through.
Thanks for my invite and sending the Outkick private jet to come pick me up. I really appreciate it.
But on top of that, we'll be live. We're doing our Friday show while the NCAA tournament is going on, and my beloved University of Tennessee Volunteers will be playing against Oregon State while we are doing our show. How many times do you think you will catch me not paying attention at all to the show that we are doing and looking over at the television screen to my right where the game's taking place?
Well, let's be honest here, Clay. You mail in pretty much every show we do when it comes to Fox Bet Live, so this may take things just to the next level. But if it's any indication of you doing it from your little Outkick lair there, knowing that your Fox cam no longer works,
I know.
You know what?
Getting it fixed this morning.
Yeah, if you want to take a full segment off, Cousin Sal, Rachel, and I will be more than happy to try and fill. We just don't want you to drop a lot of F-bombs, knowing that Rick Barnes' coaching often becomes Tennessee's undoing.
You know what's crazy is I was out doing the show, and I did the television show from Skype. There's no delay at all on Skype, and the picture quality is not much different than the massive television studio setup that I have in my home, too. It's really kind of wild to think about how technologically advanced streaming has become in many ways, right?
Well, there's a little bit in terms of audio quality, and if you go back and watch a show, there is a little bit of difference, but no, Skype becomes the great equalizer, and for a lot of the stuff that I'll do for our tournament coverage with CBS, it's all done via Skype to try and take advantage of it, and I think it just creates, that home TV studio type approach that people are none the wiser, ultimately, how they end up getting their information. And I think it's a credit to technology, and this is only going to continue to grow and evolve as linear TV may take a backseat to the digital realm.
No doubt at all. Todd Fuhrman, I appreciate the time, my man. I will see you on television tomorrow. Enjoy the games today, and enjoy the games throughout the weekend.
Yeah, it's earlier out here on the West Coast. If I can keep my day straight, I expect you to do the same, Clay.
That's Todd Fuhrman. I am Clay Travis.